Rahul, I welcome you to this colloquium today. And for those of you who are on the call, Rahul Baswani, at the simplest level of introduction, let me put it this way. He is my teacher, mentor, as far as assessment is concerned. He taught me the Hogan assessment. And I understand that he is no longer really on the certification side of Hogan, but he is a user. And he's also a PCC coach. He was at one time, if I remember right, was the chairman of the president of the ICF Delhi chapter. So he wears many hats. And before that, for several years, he was part of the YPO, the Young Prisons Organization, which is pretty much, I was one myself, and therefore it's a creme de la creme of corporate leaders. The primary condition is that before the age of 40, you should have run an organization which is of a particular size. And so the who's who of the CEOs in India, especially from the family circles, they are all members of the YPO, also in general in the world. And he used to work very closely with them. But today, Rahul is with us primarily as someone who is very knowledgeable about assessments, which I know from practical experience. And what I wanted to explore with him is about the value that assessments add to coaching, which I know from a personal perspective. I rarely do any coaching today without the support of assessments of one sort or another, whether they're psychometrics, I prefer psychometrics, or whether just 360 or a combination of 360 and psychometrics, or things like Jungian and other tests, or a combination of all. As much information that you can get about a client before you start real coaching work with them, because as you all know, as experienced coaches, coaching is about internal barriers. It's not about external barriers. It's about limiting beliefs. It's about unconscious incompetencies. And the only way that you can really get to them is by delving deep in the psyche of the individual, the personality of the individual. And there are some gurus who have really worked on it. Jung, of course, Marston, various other people, and currently Hogan, very well established. So I'm turning to a local guru of sorts at this point in time and inviting Rahul to this program. So make use of his knowledge on this space. So Rahul, since this is an interview format, and I will be going through the chats to see if there are any questions that come up. You can also, if you feel up to it, you can do it. Otherwise, I'll remind you anyway. To start with, if you could very briefly tell a little bit more about yourself than what I have said, and then start addressing this issue of why, as a coach yourself, and of course, as a trainer, having been a trainer for psychometric certifications, as well as now as a user, how do these two come together? I leave it open to you now.
Wonderful. So, first of all, thank you. Coming from you, Ram, that's high praise. And let me pick on a couple of things. So first of all, let me acknowledge the bit about the guru, and they say that it's an acronym for people who listen to you and basically come back and say, gee, you are you. So I learned the difference between guru and instructor, so to speak, and I'm going to bring it all back to the context of coaching, of course, is when I saw my wife in dialogue with somebody she referred to as a guru. And I saw the distinction between somebody who she referred to as a teacher. And to simply put, I found the big distinction was that the teacher was very instructive about how it's done, where her guru was somebody who was always questioning about her alignment on her philosophy. And that was my first understanding. So, like you, I am also a student of the human mind. I think coaching gives us a great opportunity. Like a lot of people on this call, I imagine, I came into the field not to do research, but essentially me search. And that's where it began for me. So psychometric, like this whole journey, was something I ventured into. As you mentioned, I worked for YPO. I had a good opportunity to see leaders at very close quarters. I mean, any name that I mentioned, would be name dropping. But essentially, let me say, I saw leaders in close encounters working on things that gave them creativity, and a variety. And I got a chance to see the human side of them. And I began to understand that the human softer element was so critical to leaders. It may not be to managers, it may not be to SMEs, but to leaders, that human soft touch was like, a huge part. The other thing I saw over there was a process whereby a lot of people, through conversations that were non-judgmental and kept confidential, just those conversations were enough to lead human growth. Uh, and as I sort of stepped off that role to discover a little bit more about myself and my interest, I found coaching was a great solution. So that's the first piece, that my journey that brought me here was understanding that how there's a huge part that is essentially human in a leader. B, conversations that are well managed can lead to faster individual growth than content can. Then coming to assessments, let me just sort of flag by saying that I found that in on teaching and learning, uh, without any relevant data or without targeted questioning, individuals have to rely on judgment making on other people. And when we either judge or come across as being judgmental about others, we take safety away from people. And in the absence of safety, there's neither openness nor inclusion. So if I hope that summarizes why I ended up relying on assessment in my choice of development and coaching. I'm going to pause over here and just check with you, Ram, that is the voice okay? Is everybody able to hear me clearly? Is my pace fine? Is all good?
All is well.
All right. Okay, wonderful. So I can elaborate a little bit further on that, or I'm going to pause for a second here if there's any question, Ram.
At the moment, there aren't any questions. Yeah, please do elaborate, and as questions come up, I'll remind you, or you can look at the chat box. Yeah.
Wonderful. So at the time that I started my independent practice, I worked with a partner at that point in time, and we sort of started a small practice to do coaching and training. And we found that what would set us apart uh, is if we had something objective, a validated tool to go with. And whilst there's a plethora of tools out there, uh, it was just opportunistic that Hogan Assessments at that point were running a workshop in India. And they were offering a favorable price, and attending the workshop here meant that you didn't have to travel. I don't necessarily have the background, and I carried that awareness and the related fear to that workshop. I got certified, and frankly, I got overwhelmed. Hogan itself is a very complex tool. And the only thing that I knew, that given its complexity, I'll be able to laterally transfer that understanding and knowledge to other spaces of assessment. And at that workshop itself, somehow the conversation led to Hogan offering us a partnership. I share that vignette because I want to highlight something. At that point in time, when Hogan offered me their partnership, my report indicated a kind of profile that you'd reject at most recruitment levels. And I did say to the Hogan guys, are you sure you want to partner with me? Given I'm the classic cop-out in the case studies that you're using based on assessment. And Hogan guys said, we produce data, and Hogan reports are data. This does not preclude human will and willingness. And with that, I want to set up today's conversation with two disclaimers. A, I'm coming from the lens of Hogan. I'm not advocating Hogan alone. There are fantastic tools out there. I'm not an academic, so I probably won't be able to teach psychometrics. And also the analytics of psychometric have a lot more to do with recruitment. We are coaches, and I'm going to talk a little bit about assessment from the perspective of coaching. So that's the kind of disclaimer I wanted to set. I also believe that a lot of people in the coaching field are people who don't necessarily have come from HR background or psychology background. Those two things are certificates. They are choices of a vocation we may have taken, but they don't define the individual we are. And if by any measure I can say to you is that while degrees and experience certainly help, that's pursuing this path. I mean, I think classic example is our host Ram, whose background certainly wasn't in HR so much, but rather in business. So again, I'm going to be talking about assessments from the perspective of coaching. I will not try to pursue the academic side, but rather the application part. And third, uh, I think the coach's instinct, preparedness, and the individual's desire and aspiration can certainly go past the research fact that personality does not change. But behaviors are in our choice. They are in our control. I'm going to pause here, Ram.
Yeah,
So just to check with you how we're doing.
sure. Rahul, the first question has come up from Vishy when you said that otherwise we would be ending up making judgments and assessments help us to overcome that. So his question, and I think it's a very valid question, is the assessment itself a type of judgment?
The choice that we make out of the data is indeed a judgment, but it's what I might call a qualified, validated judgment. Um, in the sense that it's a little bit like buying a car, for example. When we have the specifications, we judge the suitability. Without the specification, we are a very bit restricted about what's inside the boot. So sure, the difference I'm going to say over here, that assessments allow me to make informed judgment. Without data information, I might end up becoming judgmental, which is different from being exercising judgment. I hope that sort of answers the question, that it at least precludes the judgmental aspect in the choice.
Yeah, yeah, Vishy, yeah, you have any question?
No, it does answer to a certain extent. Thank you.
Yeah. But yeah, just to expand on that, Rahul, I think there are a couple of things that happen. Obviously, at the end of the day, there is I think the semantic difference is between a judgment and an evaluation or an assessment. And it's an assessment. Assessment is based on, as you said very clearly, on data, rather than relying upon somebody's ego or emotional judgment. And many of the psychometrics today also offer you a 360 viewpoint. So yeah, you can say 12 different people turned around and said that this guy is a criminal, he should be hanged. That's a law of nature or law of life at this point in time. It can be wrong, but the very fact that you're going across to 12 different people, so it gives a more holistic view of what it is. And very often in our own experience, we find that these are very, very useful. I have found 360s tremendously useful when they are used along with psychometric. So then there was another one, Sridhar, he says, Rahul, how would you define judgment in the first place? Just to level the audience in the context of your talk. And the second one is from Venkat. Why is informed judgment necessary for success as a coach?
Right. So let me take the first one. I mean, as a coach, I want to talk about the evaluation judgment piece. Let me define this. I think that when we are in the space of recruitment, talent acquisition, let me sort of lighten it up by saying it's a bit like an arranged marriage. The certain specifications are in play. We know what our requirement is. We know what our culture is. And whilst we have a CV in place and we have some reference checks, what we also want to do is personality supporting it to align to our job. If you were to boil it down, and if you take assessment away, then what is the purpose of an interview too? There too, we are arriving at a judgment. We are merely adding on to that by taking support of some data, a data which is intended to see beyond persons, what we say, and I don't want to use the word mask, but their self-presentation. In my experience, I've found people that I've been very close to, I have found in their assessment reports aspects that I did not see on their regular day-to-day basis. It helped me to understand them better. Now, I want to slip from here to the second point. Judgment is what managers do. They make good decisions. And judgment is critical part also of leaders because they are able to evaluate options. Again, I'm going to distinguish from over here. When we talk about coaching, we move away from our need to make the judgment, but which is a role that we need to do in hiring and recruitment. But at the point of coaching, we are depending more on the individual's openness, willingness to share, explore. We know that coachability is very, very critical to a successful coaching outcome. Now, why is informed judgment necessary for success as a coach? Frankly, I don't think that we need so much of the judgment in the coaching space. When we move to the coaching, we have to rely more on inclusivity. We have to rely on understanding and following the pattern of the individual in front of us. Our job is to be not so much as self-curious, but the other curious. So to that extent, my intent is to use assessment for a person to get self-reflection, for a person to understand not what they do, which they already know because of their job, not how they do, because that they get to hear about from performance evaluation, but indeed, why is it that they do some things better and others they struggle? And I hope that kind of answers the question for Vinky. So judgment, I think judgment as a manager, as an individual is always improved. We even do judgment when we decide which client to work with, which coachee to take on or not take on. Judgment is just an aggregate of our experiences and our education and the choices we make based on our instinct. Like I said, I use assessment to get away from judgmental, unconscious biases. A lot of times when we are recruiting, we are tend to draw ourselves to people who are more like us. But in the coaching space, I use assessments from the intention of trying to create a mirror from data that the coachee has produced by his own self-evaluation. So it's non-threatening. It's closer to what the coachee knows about himself, but it aggregates that information in more manageable pieces. I'm going to pause here to make sure that I've been able to support those two questions.
Rahul, I'll allow Venkat to explain his question, but before that, I just wanted to make a comment. I don't think anybody here would question the use of assessments for recruitment. In fact, a classic book that I would like many of the people here to perhaps read if they haven't read is by Abhijit Bhaduri, who used to be with Wipro till recently. He wrote this book called Don't Hire the Best, but Hire the Right. And there he actually devotes one section of the whole book to Hogan. He was so impressed by it. And the way that he explains is brilliant, because he says that what happens when you recruit somebody is you look at the CV or you look at testimonials and so on and so forth, but you really do not have an opportunity to put that person through a stress test, as it were. Yeah, sure, you can do some ACDCs and all that stuff. But far more importantly is that Hogan, by means of the psychometric assessment, is able to somewhat recreate that situation of the stress test to be able to do that. So that's a remarkable book. I learned a lot from it. Now, in this particular case, I think what Venkat is probably asking is, coaching on the one hand is supposed to be a journey into the unknown, both the coach and the client going not knowing. And therefore, there could be a question that is asked as to why a previous knowledge about something is necessary if both of them are to venture into it as unknown. Venkat, I would like you to open up and ask, is that the perspective you're asking that from, or in another perspective?
Precisely, Ram, that was the perspective. And also the perspective was how comfortable coachee will be when he knows the coach has some views about him already. So will it not shut him out? It was in that perspective I was asking the question. But I also listened to what Rahul said in response to that. But I think then I see it more as a me search question for the coach himself, because despite having the knowledge, how can he dissociate with it and have the coaching session in a purely open frame of mind? The only challenge I feel is if the coachee knows I have the judgment, how will he respond? That is the only doubt which I had.
Okay. I mean, I'll answer that part of it, make it simpler for Rahul. In all my experience, it is a coachee's choice, the client's choice, to provide the assessment. No coach can make the call on the client to say that you must submit it. So if a client himself, herself, is deriving value from it, only then they will come up with it. So that part of it is not really as much an issue as probably other part. Rahul, over to you.
Perfect. So thanks for the setup. So I really, find that a nice segue is opened up for me. Let me say this. If you think about coaching, the power of the coaching, aside from the coachability of the client, is about setting up an accurate contract. Many times we end up setting up coaching contracts on rational, tangible items because they're easy to describe and see. Oftentimes, it might take more than one, two, sometimes even three sessions to get to what is really the story behind the presenting story. Oftentimes, we reach coaching when people are going through a transition. My view is that it's the same individual who goes to office and goes back to work. They may exercise different behaviors. This research shows that 85% of the time we are the same individual. Um, uh, Now, what that means is that there are people, when they're going through a personal shift or when they're facing crisis at work, they carry that both ways. A lot of these crises that begin to have a paradigm impact on us are when we are beginning to discover ourselves. It's gently called a midlife crisis, So somebody might turn around and discover that he was never an engineer. His father was. He was always meant to be a scriptwriter. So, these self discoveries, oftentimes I find that the kind of people who are able to afford coaching or who are nominated for coaching are at a certain age band. So they try to deal with their challenges rationally, but they are beginning to feel an internal challenge. Let me say this: when we start to discover what truly motivates us, when we start to get that inner calling, we don't even know sometimes that is a dissatisfaction or creative dissonance. Uh, I find that an assessment that talks about inner values and motivations, and again, I'm referring to Hogan's MVPI here. I'm sure that there are other tests that also measure inner values. Uh, a lot of awareness comes for individuals. It helps them to craft their why. It helps them to understand why they've worked better in certain cultures and environments, even though the pay was worse. And why is it that they are motivated to doing certain things for their team? They begin to discover themselves. Now, to me, this is the beautiful story, because there is a reason why they say that culture eats strategy for breakfast. You put the clay court expert like Nadal, he'll struggle in Wimbledon a little bit more. So, for me, a good assessment at least gives me the talking points and skips sometimes even 2 sessions of coaching, because my starting point is the dissonance. Let me give a quick example. Many people would believe that if you're doing business, your motivation is about profit. However, that may not always be true. Some people are simply motivated by the idea of recognition and they want to build a brand that's known. Some people are driven by altruism. They're very happy, interning everybody, overlooking performance mistakes, just generally sort of, including people. Some people are merely motivated by science. And, so there are different motivations. At our workplace, and all of you, if you think about the time that you were dissonant at a workplace, what was missing for you uh, was that driver was not being satisfied. I'll give you my example. I'm highly motivated by aesthetics, beauty, and creativity. I can't work in an environment that is not clean and dirty. And I know it sounds superficial. I can't work on a PowerPoint unless it's formatted. And my team gets frustrated because I go start formatting things. How has that knowledge helped me? I've stopped being guilty about my need. I've embraced myself. Second, I've also learned that I'm going to be more effective if I meet that need that that will help me to be more productive. So I find that many times the gap between what is my motivation and what my environment is providing me is where the dissonance is. And to me, that's the heart of the dissatisfaction. And as coaches, we know if there is no dissatisfaction, there is no motivation to undergo coaching because there's nowhere to go. So a clarity on the source of dissatisfaction, The values that are out of alignment helps us coaches to get into the game and help people to start planning the next steps. I talked a lot there, Ram. I don't know if I answered anything, but I'm going to pause.
No, you certainly answered a few of those questions. What I would like to really move you to is what most coaches really struggle with, in terms of the fact we all know that in coaching, the external barriers are probably far less important than the internal barriers. And it's really the internal barriers which create the real hurdles, the interferences like Timothy Galway talks about in Inner Game and so on. And the internal barriers are very often not seen, they're unconscious. So that's really where you are moving from the unconscious incompetence, as it were, to the final state of unconscious competence. I won't take much time, but just to give you an example, one of the things that I realized for myself when I was looking at, and I once made the statement to you, for me, Hogan is like a horoscope. I'm able to read from that the personality of a person as an astrologer would read about your future life. And to some extent, that's true. What I want you to expand on is certain combinations. For example, if a person highly ambitious, at the same time, he is also high power value oriented or recognition oriented, and another person who is highly ambitious, but whose power and recognition needs are low, but at the same time, altruism and certain other things are very high, they are going to be very, very different in terms of their approaches to life and work. And so how are those things going to matter? And also very specifically in Hogan, where I found a tremendous value was by going through what you call the HTS, which is about those factors which might probably impede your growth, which is not that easy to see. So if you could cover that as well. And probably there are others who are used to Hogan who could ask more detailed questions.
Ram, with your permission, I'd like to build this up in 3 steps.
Sure, please.
So that we don't jump into Hogan entirely. And I'm going to apologize ahead of time if I'm going to be talking about touching on some of the topics which require perhaps greater academic detail. But I'm going to talk a little bit fleetingly to set a context, right? So, for example, classical psychotherapy has been around for a long time, which tries to address the intrapsychic structures, where the failure is. And broadly speaking, and we laugh about a lot of the practice that were done, that you need to be constantly in therapy, right? Most of us were generally, according to the classical continental psychology, was that, there is an element of neuroticism that we are born with. And at best, you can arrive at functional neuroticism, which to some extent may be right. But I think there perhaps has been a lot of critics of that work of Jung and Freud accuse some of these founders of self-projection, on others. Be as that may be, we all have intrapsychic structures that we struggle with. But like everything else, like most useful things, unfortunately, they've been the child of war. And so psychometric came into the game when we started to feel that there's a need and there is a function for psychometry. I mean, the psychotherapy is not solving the problem in terms of the individual or the more wider community need. So the question came, actually, the Chinese were the first ones using assessment centers to some extent to find, what kind of soldiers and generals to recruit. But the one that has been perhaps the biggest one was the post-World War defeat. The Germans found that they needed a different caliber of officers. So that's kind of how war brought psychometrics and the need to measure psyche into the workspace. Simultaneously, there were the other 2 debates, the inside-out perspective on measuring psychology. So, for example, the ipsative measures like MBTI, which is a fantastic tool, has been around robustly for a long time, which sort of aggregates what we think of ourselves. Because that aggregation helps us to kind of do some self-analysis. And oftentimes, I still say that if you're going to do life coaching, personal coaching, sometimes perhaps MBTI is a more useful tool, sometimes. Then came the other perspective, the outside-in part of the personality. What do people think of me? What kind of dynamics are created? So let me bottom line that by saying that there are 2 aspects to personality. I am coming and speaking to this group with a certain perspective and intentionality. but I'm not in control of the impact I may be landing on you. At the end of this, I don't get to evaluate myself, you do. And life is like that. The impact we have on other people, no matter how good our intentions, is what going to determine how we are measured. So Hogan per se and other psychometric measures like the Big Five workplace, there is a reputational architecture. So that's the kind of piece I'm building to, that there is two pieces of personality, we have to be mindful of them. So it really depends on what you're looking to measure, the reputational piece or the self-aggregated piece. So I'm going to pause over here. I've gave you a little bit of a history and a perspective on the two sides, the two viewpoints of personality, what you think of me and what I think of myself. Now let me come to the leadership piece. Imagine, if you will, there are two components, a car and the fuel that goes into it. Successful leaders, like a successful car, need a good engine and also need plenty of fuel. What Ram was referring to was a very interesting dynamic. What happens to people when they're motivated and driven by a need for power and achievement? Those kind of people, as you can imagine, are motivated by a need to drive the agenda, a need to create a legacy that outlives them. But like everything else, they're also biased by the fact that their world is full of only two kinds of people, winners and losers. Okay. Now, for that reality to come alive, you need to be in an environment that gives you opportunities and freedom to work. Okay, that may or may not happen. Sometimes your environment will give you freedom. Some environments are a little bit more claustrophobic. But what is worse is that when you carry your environment with you, i.e., you're motivated by power, but in your day-to-day behavior, you don't demonstrate constructs of what might constitute ambitious behaviors, i.e., you're not competitive, you don't demonstrate self-confidence, you're socially shy and retiring, and perhaps you're going through lack of clarity and identity. Maybe your background is such that you were never encouraged to measure your own accomplishments. So imagine if you're the kind of person who was never given praise early on, who grew up in a culture where self-confidence perhaps got crushed down, perhaps you were discouraged from being the tall poppy, and you're going through a transition where you're not clear what to commit yourself to. So you can see, driven by power from the inside, not demonstrating behaviors on day-to-day basis. When you meet people like this, you can pretty much identify them because they show high level of frustration. These are the kind of people who are likely to respond, why do I have to put my hand up? Why do I have to pretend to be proactive? I've proven myself in this job. People know where to find me, right? It's a tough conversation to have. A lot of these people, if they're not supported by coaches or by the environment, can become extreme disruptors because they're frustrated. Some of them, history says that they were very clever. We have two examples. There was Shakuni from Mahabharata, and there was Chanakya. Both of them decided that they don't have the behavior, the surface behavior to be the captain of the crew. So they found themselves valid candidates in Duryodhan and was it Chandragupta, and they became kingmakers. So they found a quick fix. So that's one thing. If I may, Ram, let me pick one more example. I'm going to pause here for a second. That do you understand now that there is the fuel, which is power, and there's the engine. But if your engine is small, that fuel is not going to be very productive. The alternate may happen. You may have a massive engine in the car, but you don't have enough fuel, i.e., from the outside, you come across as competitive, very, very confident. You look like, you're very clear about where you want to go, and you make the social impression. But from the inside, you may not have the desire for ascendancy. It can happen. People like that fold up when they have to face the politics and the mudslinging that oftentimes in the corporate world is a part and parcel of leadership. So we are now talking about two dynamics in the personality. Do I have the sustainability and do I have the behaviors? I'm going to pause over here just to make sure, because I know I'll spat out a lot of data.
No, that's very interesting data. I don't see any questions at this point in time. I was personally very engrossed, and I think it made a lot of sense.
Let me pick one more example where people short circuit themselves. And I picked that example for two reasons. I'm talking to coaches right now. A lot of us coaches get hit by this. Many of the people, not all, because there is no one fixed way to be a successful coach, right? I mean, our rigor, and of course, we'll be colored by our personalities. But a lot of coaches really come to this job to meet one desire. Their fuel oftentimes is something called altruism, a desire to do good, a desire to contribute by creating purpose, by doing meaningful work. Many of them find an outlet by doing NGO work, by doing work at hospitals, supporting other people. But many of the people don't get that opportunity because they are in jobs that are a little bit more demanding. They ventilate this need of altruism by extreme customer centricity. Many of the people who walk away and choose their own path get frustrated with all the other stuff they are doing. That self-discovery midlife part, when you discover that, it's these endless meetings, I've got a good pay, I've got good reputation in my job, but what is it adding up to? I meet people like that between their the mid 40s, a lot of them beginning to face that cross point because they're not able to meet the drivers. Many of the coaches I talk to were really motivated to make a difference and contribute. Many of the coaches I meet want to contribute, but hesitate to acknowledge it. Because once you acknowledge your purpose, there's no getting away. It comes with a lot of accountability, right? Many of the people who are driven by this desire to help people, altruism, which is the fuel, don't have the machine that goes with it. And the machine in this case is interpersonal sensitivity. These people don't exhibit sensitivity. They're honest, they have integrity, but they don't apply verbal fluff. They're a lot more binary and factual. They speak the truth, but perhaps don't pick the timing or the appropriateness of words to land their message well. And when the feedback comes that they're seen as insensitive and sometimes aloof and uncaring, it hurts people because at their heart is nothing but good for the other and service. A lot of my coaching is around these people, helping them to use language which doesn't compromise their sense of values. If you are one of those people, the first thing you'll be thinking is, why do I have to put the verbal fluff? Why do I have to layer it with sweetness when I'm not making it personal, merely giving facts? The important thing I say to you is stay focused on the outcome you're looking for. And if you have to adapt your way without compromising your value, then introduce the languaging that must. So Ram, thank you for introducing those two models. This is about sustained leadership. I often tell people that leaders come in 5 or 6 colors. From the school that I represent, leaders can be result leaders, they can be people leaders, they can be knowledge leaders, they can be process leaders, and they may also be what you call social leaders. So there's a range of leadership that might come depending on what's your fuel and does it match your engine. I see a question there, Ram. Which one do you want me to go for?
Many of them are comments. There are 2 questions. One is from Joe, which says, how good is MBTI in coaching? And I would rephrase it slightly to say, how would you use the inside-out model like MBTI with outside-in model like what you talked about, Hogan and other psychometrics, so that you can offer maximum value in coaching?
I find a lot of Hogan practitioners still, so let me talk on the positive side only, right? Because naturally working on one tool, I have also developed my own biases. But MBTI is highly regarded because it's sort of showed tremendous sustainability. Also the model is very, very well structured. But a lot of people complain about the variation in MBTI that they begin to see over time. For 2 reasons. The part that moves in Hogan a lot, which is the big piece in MBTI, the part that moves in Hogan a lot is the part that we are most wedded to. It's called identity. And the simple way to assess that, if you look back in time, were you the same person that you are today that you were when you were graduating college? Were you the same person when you were a young executive and how much you changed when you married a stranger, but suddenly that stranger became more important than blood. How were you? What were you motivated by then? In your younger days, you were motivated by fun. Later on, you were motivated by friendships. But when you started to get money in your pocket, perhaps after one or two promotions, you were motivated by power. And then one day you knew there's a kid on the way and you got mortgage on the house and you're motivated now by security. Our roles continue to shift around us, so does the landscape, and redefines us. On any given day, you, I, and all of us are wedded to our identity. And oddly enough, it's the most flowing part of the river of life. Our behaviors tend to be a lot more consistent. When it comes to coaching, internal coaching, when it comes to, I think at a mid level, at a more introductory level, MBTI serves well. A, because people are able to relate to it more because it doesn't give the bad news that reputational information does. I may think that I'm wonderful, uh, but other people may reputationally say that I don't stop talking, which is what I'm doing right now. But so it's important to know that uh, hard news is not for everyone. You need to have a certain amount of bandwidth and seniority to be able to deliver the hard news. Also, I think when you're doing life coaches versus work coaching, the focus is on the inside of you. So there, I think a tool like MBTI actually may be more purposeful. But that said, let me make one more comment. And I hope it resonates with many of you. Life coaching may not pay as much as executive coaching does, but by the third session, it's all life coaching, man. I'm looking at a question which says lack of self-awareness. I'm not sure, Sri, if I've got that question right. Let me answer the easier question over here. How often should tests be repeated? I can't speak for MBTI. There's been a lot of raging debates. I already apologize that I'm not the academic, but I know the big debate that rages around MBTI. Some of it is unfair. Some of it is just human need for variety. People get bored and move on and try new tools. But if you discount that part, MBTI shows a lot more shift in the scores. MBTI moves. But Hogan, we don't recommend that you take a Hogan test more than once in 3 years because there might be some shifts. The only exception would be if you went through a defining life shift. Again, there is some subjectivity to that. For some people, losing a job may be akin to losing a spouse, you know, if they were married to a dragon, that is. But for a lot of people, losing a spouse, losing a child or a sibling, going through an accident, that can be life altering. But other than that, I would even hesitate to say that, you know, even 4 or 5 years is okay with the same Hogan report because behavior part doesn't change that much. But most organizations would not like to see a report that's less than 3 years. I mean, like more than 3 years old. For me, the assessment is merely a data point. It's an evaluation of the landscape of where you are today. I'm more interested in your understanding of the assessment to determine what behaviors you will exercise. Remember this, it's a double-edged sword. No matter what your score, if you're highly ambitious, you can be hyper competitive with your own family. If you're very low on ambition, you'll be loved by your team, but perhaps lose opportunities to rise in the organization. What I'm trying to say is, no matter where the scale is, it's a valid identity. It'll have the upside, but it'll also have flip side. So rather than work on changing your personality, which amounts to very little, it's better to choose strategically targeted behaviors and put your effort there.
There are quite a few questions, Rahul. I just want to make a quick comment. Most of the things that you said about MBTI is also arising from the original book that Jung wrote, based on which Myers-Briggs developed MBTI, where Jung categorically states that once this is done, it's fixed and it cannot change, which is not true at all. And Jung himself accepted it later. But unfortunately, in the book Personality Types, that's what he says. So a lot of misconception as a result of that arises from people who haven't really read Jung through and reflect only a part of their learning. You're absolutely right. Both of them, whether it's a psychometric like Hogan or whoever else or MBTI, they are snapshots in time and they could represent different things at different points in time, depending upon even your moods when you take the test. In fact, they warn you about that. You should be relaxed, not be stressed, and all that stuff. So that's one aspect of it. So the coach also has to be, I mean, there's a discounting factor from a psychological term in terms of doing that. What is, there are a couple of questions you can cover, but more importantly, I think for most people here, when you talked about a coach, the coach is altruistic, but if the coach doesn't have enough of interpersonal sensitivity, he or she is not going to be a good coach. One of the problems that most coaches face is not just that alone. I'm a good coach. I have tremendous interpersonal sensitivity. I'm altruistic. I'm dash, dash, dash. But I am not the kind of person who is going to be able to promote myself for whatever reason. Maybe I have the engine, I don't have the fuel, or I didn't even have the engine, and I may not have the fuel as well. So what do you think are those qualities in a Hogan kind of a test or anything else, which would indicate the type of personality that would reflect a born coach, as it were, or a naturalizable coach?
Okay, so I'm going to give an answer which I think will be more palatable by people in the sense that first of all, what is interesting, let me go back to the first comment you made. You're that part about a lot of people coming from the heart place but not doing as good a job of expressing themselves. Ram, oddly enough, that may actually work for a small population of people who are themselves very direct, people who themselves get confused and lost when people give work. But remember, that match is a very small population. So I think people who are very directive, who tend to not be able to modulate that tone. Have you heard about tonality in coaching, right? I mean, there is a time when the person in front of us looks confused, that we mirror that emotion. And there is a part where the person has had the insight, they want to move forward, and we have to jump with the tone of the warrior and say, what next, buddy, right? So empathy is a lot about beginning to smell out where that person is. Now, interpersonal sensitivity is a lot to do about not just sensitivity, but also meaning not just empathy, but also a sense of caring about the other person. It's also about the diplomatic and tactful use of words. Now, diplomatic use of word is a word that bothers a lot of people, right? But it's not a lie. Manipulative is bad. Tact is not. Tact is merely a timing of our words, right? So oftentimes, a lot of people feel that they have the license to give the truth, as long as it's the truth, at any time. I think that as a smart coach, you would sort of use hesitation, step back, and the breathing space to sort of land your message right. So that's one part. Let me gradually move to Ram's question. Many times, to self-promote, you need to be motivated by 2 to 3 things. A missionary zeal. I mean, if you think of all religions that are successful, missionary zeal drove them. Those that didn't have a missionary zeal remained very, very smaller religions. And I use religion as a metaphor for any thought process, any ethical process, any policy process. So people who are motivated to self-promote do so successfully when they are either motivated by power, i.e. a desire to create a legacy, and they are very comfortable and in fact very desirous of that legacy outlasting them, right? Because a lot of people otherwise tend to be short-term thinkers. They think no more than my lifetime, my job, my political tenure, etc., etc. So legacy hunting, and you can see that currently we have a leader who's very, very motivated by this drive, creating a legacy, making disruptive shifts. The second driver that can be is that when people are motivated by recognition, public appreciation, public fame, a desire to be known by a wide number of people. That also motivates people. Again, that needs to be supported by behaviors of sociability, much like we talked about how power needs to be supported by ambitious behaviors. The third thing is commerce. I find a lot of people driving ascendancy, going past their natural dislike for people and networking if commerce drives them. Money for money's sake. Let me clarify that. We all need money. Some of you needed to give it as charity, some to buy fancy clothes, some to buy new toys. We all need money. But a few people over here who think constantly in terms of ROI, who think constantly in terms of bottom line impact of choices, and how well am I measured by others based on my salary. That's called money for money's sake. I would never want to have a leader or a business driver who didn't have motivation from commerce. So perhaps, Ram, your motivation was altruism. Perhaps your motivation was uh, a desire to build a legacy in creating a coach community, but perhaps not enough commerce, perhaps not enough personal recognition. It could have been those things. It's all speculation because I don't remember your report.
Yeah, no, it's not so much about, yeah, in my case, I think I score highly in commerce as well as recognition, as well as whatever else, as well as interpersonal sensitivity and sociability. That's, yeah, but you're right. In terms of many coaches who really would like to make a mark for themselves and they find that they have a problem, these are some of the things. It could even be the fact that they don't have the ambition, for example. They don't have the power needs or recognition needs and so on and so forth. So that's really what I wanted to get from you. And the other is, there were questions about, does self-assessment change depending on the frame of mind of a coachee? Example, if this person has just faced a trauma and working out of this, would the assessment change?
Right. So let me answer those couple of those questions. Right. I'm going to try and take them in a bit of an order. I think Vijaya had a question about, would you recommend specific strength-based focused assessment? Let me talk about Ram, I hope I'm not moving away too much from your question. But
no. This is perfectly fine. Please start with that question and go
appreciate
down.
It. Thanks.
Yeah.
Here's a couple of things that I recommend to people. These are broad statements because I'm neither here to diss nor to recommend any assessment over other. And I once again make the disclaimer. It's just that I've used Hogan more than anything else. That's all. I think for groups that are fragmented, for groups which are a little bit fragile, or in an environment where people are extremely concerned about judgments and opinions. I find traditional businesses, traditional family businesses, many of the older businesses, and I apologize, like I've seen some of these examples all coming out of many of the old South-based companies. A lot of time people I find are very extremely conscious about, what people will judge on. The judgment of the others is very important. I find companies that are going through transition. I find startups that are beginning to hit, that $40-50 million mark, where a lot of the people who joined initially are beginning to face the glass ceiling, and the groups are now becoming defensive and siloized. For a lot of those groups, it's better to use an assessment like Strength Finder, because it brings the positive news, right? It focuses more on what's the possibilities rather than the development. I find those a safer exercise. Many times when you're working with young, smaller groups, I find 4-box assessments like DISC, and there are a lot of free online versions for those, very useful. I find that when you're doing a training program and an MDP, you might pick up simpler assessments that are more attached to the modules. Like, I don't know, I think the Thomas Kilman conflict inventory, that's a good one to talk about. How do you deal with conflict? So there are some targeted small inventories that you can pick up on that need. I would pick up simpler applications when people are, doing assessments for the first time. They're juniors. Why invest that kind of money? Again, for life coaching, I've already said use some things that aggregate yourself. But for teams and companies that are very used to, high pressure, senior leadership level, I think you can afford to go for the stronger tools, maybe the SHLs, Hogan. There are others as well. So, you can go with those kind of tools. Now, moving to Vishy's question, or is a comment, reputation is a lagging indicator. What we can say at any point in time is work on us. So isn't it inside out is the way to transform ourselves? Yes, that's a good one, Vishy. You see, it's a lot of it is ultimately whatever we do and produce is always produced with an audience in mind. Now I know that's a difficult one for a lot of people who are on a strong inner journey. But the truth is that as long as we're living in this world, as long as we are out there to serve, it does matter of aligning our efforts toward what people are asking of us.
And
And I
also,
want to,
Rahul, sorry,
sorry.
if I may just an added thing on that, it
Yes,
takes a
please.
bit of time. Takes a bit of time to change people's perception. People need to do the double the work. I'm telling. Once we formed a perception, it takes a lot more effort to get rid of that and create a new one.
Oh, bang on. In fact, that gives all the more reason that why we should be conscious of reputation. I'll tell you why reputation is a handy tool to have. Reputation is easy to make. Reputation is in my control. I can choose to repute you. And reputation is easy to organize. But because of its ease and because of its alignment to my preferences in some way, reputation is hard to change. They say that you have to do 10 times the work to change 10% of the reputation. The truth of the matter is, we are barely completing 1 hour on this call, but the reputation that you have about me was formed about 40 minutes ago. At about 40 minutes ago, you were in a position already to judge me, evaluate me, make a recommendation on me. Reputation building is far more easier and I'm not saying accurate, but more easy to work with rather than waiting to find out what the other person's identity is. Because to determine your identity or Ram's identity, I have to go through a tremendous amount of scrutiny, questioning, inquisition. You know, I form a reputation, I'm done. Tell me this, if you think about it, you're unlikely to lend money to this guy who borrowed money from you in school and refused to return it. So reputation is a tough thing that chases us for the long time. I tell you what, man, gets the job done. So
Rahul, yeah, we are almost at the end of time. So unless it's a 20-second answer, you can skip the last one, or if you can, within 20 seconds.
Yeah, let me attempt to give quick answers to the ones so that I feel that I've got everyone covered.
Yeah.
Self-assessment changes on the frame of mind of a coachee for two things. Like I said, the identity piece, which is what I'm motivated by, the fuel that I talk about, may change because of the change in my roles, change in my circumstances and experience. My day-to-day behaviors may not change. My grandfather was an organized tyrant, at 85, as much as he was when he told me himself at 25. Now, I like this last one that's come. So yes, in answer to the question, we always tell people, don't take a test if you're going through trauma. Don't take a test and don't rely on the result of a test that you've taken. It's a bit like doing your pathology test after I had a big night of drinking. Your triglycerides are going to shoot out of the box, right? I don't recommend it. And Ram's smiling because he's done this before. All right. Also, in addition to the engine and fuel, fantastic. Here's what it is. Assessment may measure your score on ambition, okay? But ambitious behaviors do not guarantee success. I can be ambitious and successfully clean up my cupboard 3 times in one day. It's not about being active. It's about being productive. So the ability to do 2 or 3 things, be clarity of purpose, discipline in the right direction, and the ability to pause, reflect, and be available for what we call coachability. Because people who are not coachable don't develop and learn from their own lessons because they simply don't make mistakes. So coachability, setting the right purpose, and then exercising the discipline are things because it's okay to complete a job list, which is what ambition will take care of. But what is on the job list is what will determine success. I think I've pretty much covered over here. I'm going to pause over here, Ram. I think we are out of time, but
we are pretty much on time. We'll close at this point. And Rahul, thanks a lot. I think there are a lot of compliments which are coming your way. And in fact, like all the studies say that in the first 20 seconds, you establish your reputation, whether people want to listen to you or not. I think you did that. So for my duty, I have to, the password for the day's program for the CCUs is Rahul assessment. Please bear with us. Magda is on vacation and therefore you might have a delay of about a couple of weeks before you can get it, but please submit whenever you wish and you will get your CCUs. And once again, Rahul, thanks a lot. For the rest of you, thanks for being with us. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you. And by all means, Ram, send any questions that come in subsequently. I'll be happy to answer anything.
Yeah. So please
Thank you.
send it to me and I'll send it across to Rahul. Thanks a lot. Bye. Take care.
Bye. Thank you.